When a woman chooses to live alone, without the constant presence of a man by her side, society often surrounds her with projections. Some imagine her as lonely, incomplete, or lacking what is considered essential. Others romanticize her independence as though it were a rebellion against the natural order. Yet both views miss the deeper truth. To live alone is not simply a matter of circumstance, but, at its deepest level, an encounter with the soul itself. Such a woman walks a path that is archetypal, for she confronts solitude not as a void but as a vessel. In the silence of her home, she faces the voices within that most people drown in the noise of companionship. Where others escape into relationships to avoid themselves, she learns to dwell with her own depths. This is not always easy. Solitude is a mirror, and it shows the truths we would prefer to avoid. But those who endure it, those who refuse to flee, often find treasures that cannot be discovered in the bustle of shared life. The truth about women who live alone is that they cultivate an intimacy with the unseen. They listen to dreams, to intuitions, to the subtle movements of the inner world. In their solitude, they are initiated into mysteries of selfhood that cannot be revealed when one's identity is constantly reflected and shaped by another. This does not mean they reject love or despise partnership. It means they have stepped into a deeper initiation where the soul itself becomes their first companion. In myth and symbol, the solitary woman has always been present. She is the wise woman in the forest, the maiden who refuses to marry, the queen who rules in her own right. She embodies not lack but sovereignty, not loneliness but wholeness. She teaches us that fulfillment is not always tied to union with another, but can also be found in union with the depths of one's own spirit. This truth unsettles society because it challenges the assumption that a woman's identity must always be defined by her relationship to a man. Yet these women are not cold, nor detached from the world. On the contrary, their solitude gives them a greater capacity for depth in all relationships. Because they have faced themselves, they are less likely to be consumed by illusions. Because they have made peace with silence, they are not desperate for noise. Because they have learned to live without dependency, they are capable of loving freely, without clinging or fear. Their strength is not born of hardness, but of integration, and that strength radiates in their presence. The woman who lives alone reminds us of a universal truth: every soul must one day stand alone. Companionship may ease the journey, but no one else can walk into the deepest places of the self for us. To live alone without a man is to embody this truth outwardly, to live in the open what all must face within. It is not a mark of deficiency, but of courage. For she has chosen not to hide from the most profound encounter of all, the encounter with herself. To speak of solitude as a vessel, and not a void, is to approach the mystery of women who live alone from a deeper vantage, one that does not remain fixed on appearances or social judgments, but on the inner reality of what it means to dwell with oneself. A woman who chooses or finds herself alone without the daily presence of a man is often misunderstood by the world. The common imagination paints her existence as barren, incomplete, or even tragic. For society is conditioned to believe that wholeness comes only through partnership. Yet beneath these assumptions lies a profound truth. Solitude is not emptiness, but a container in which the soul can unfold. To call it a vessel is to recognize that it holds, it nurtures, and it carries within it the potential for transformation. When a woman embraces solitude, she steps into a landscape that most fear to enter. In companionship, it is easy to distract oneself, to project inner conflicts onto another, to weave daily life around the drama of relationships. Alone, those distractions fall away, and what is left is the voice within, the raw, unfiltered presence of the self. At first, this can feel like a void, for silence exposes what has been hidden under layers of business. Yet if she remains, if she allows herself to sit with the silence and the echo of her own being, the void begins to change. What seemed empty reveals itself as spacious. What felt like absence becomes a fertile ground for inner dialogue, creativity, and spiritual depth. This is why solitude can never be reduced to loneliness. Loneliness is the ache of emptiness, the longing for what is missing, but solitude, when embraced, becomes a vessel in which presence grows. It becomes the space in which a woman listens to her dreams, to her intuitions, to the subtle rhythms of her inner life. Instead of seeking constant affirmation in the eyes of another, she begins to cultivate an affirmation that comes from within. In that process, she encounters aspects of herself that may have remained buried in the noise of relationship, her hidden strengths, her vulnerabilities, her forgotten passions, even her shadows. Solitude forces a confrontation, but in that confrontation lies the possibility of integration. To live in this vessel is not easy. The woman who dwells in it must face the judgments of society, the pity of those who cannot see beyond conventions, and the doubt that occasionally whispers in her own heart. She must resist the temptation to believe that her worth is diminished because her life does not conform to expectation. Yet precisely in resisting, she discovers a new strength, one that comes not from defiance but from authenticity. She learns that her life is not a lack but a different form of fullness. The vessel of solitude does not strip her of meaning, but deepens it. It is in this space that she discovers she is enough in herself, and from that realization comes a radiance that cannot be feigned. Solitude also reshapes her relationship with time. Without the constant rhythm of another life intertwined with hers, she becomes more attuned to her own cycles, her own seasons. She learns to flow with her inner tides, to honor her own pace. The vessel of solitude allows her to linger in reflection, to move slowly through moments that others rush past. In this way, her life acquires a depth and texture often absent in the lives of those who are endlessly absorbed in the demands of partnership. This deepening is visible to those around her, though they may not fully understand it. They sense in her a stillness, a presence, a way of being that carries the imprint of someone who has touched the roots of her own soul. The woman who lives alone also enters into a different kind of dialogue with the world. Without the constant mirror of a man to reflect her identity, she begins to relate to life itself as her companion. The seasons become her teachers, the quiet hours her sanctuary, the small details of daily existence her companions. The vessel of solitude trains her to see meaning in what others overlook, to find intimacy in what others dismiss as ordinary. This intimacy with life is what makes her solitude fertile rather than barren. She does not wither in isolation, she deepens her roots into the soil of existence, drawing nourishment directly from the mystery of being. It is important to see that this vessel does not exclude love or relationship. The truth is subtler. A woman who has learned to live alone is not incapable of love, but is no longer enslaved by the need for it to complete her. She carries within herself a fullness that makes her capable of entering relationships freely, without the desperation of filling a void. This freedom is precisely what gives her love, when it does come, a different quality, less bound by fear, less burdened by expectation, more radiant in authenticity. Yet even without it, her life is not diminished. For the vessel of solitude continues to hold her spirit in its transformative embrace. To describe solitude as a vessel is also to acknowledge its sacred dimension. In myth and symbol, vessels are containers of life, of nourishment, of mystery. The chalice, the womb, the sacred cup, all speak of a space that holds the essence of being. In the same way, a woman's solitude becomes a sacred vessel, holding the essence of her unfolding self. What society calls emptiness is, in fact, a sacred space where she encounters her own depths. The truth that emerges from such solitude is not easily articulated, for it is known more by experience than by words, but it radiates in her presence, in her gaze, in the quiet strength she carries. Thus, when a woman lives alone without a man, she is not stepping into nothingness, but into the very vessel that allows her to discover who she is beyond roles, beyond expectations, beyond projections. This vessel, though invisible to the world, shapes her in ways that cannot be measured from the outside. It teaches her to stand in her own presence, to draw life from within, to see herself not as incomplete but as whole. It is this wholeness, cultivated in solitude, that becomes her greatest treasure, for it is unshakable, rooted not in the fleeting approval of others, but in the timeless encounter with her own soul. To speak of living without a man as revealing sovereignty and wholeness beyond societal projections is to touch the core of a truth often obscured by collective illusions. A woman who chooses or happens to live alone is rarely seen for what she truly is. Instead, she is burdened with the weight of other people's imaginations. Some pity her, believing she has failed in the script of life that demands a man as the axis of her existence. Others envy her, projecting onto her solitude a kind of defiance or rebellion that seems glamorous but disconnected from reality. In both cases, the woman herself disappears behind a veil of assumptions. Yet behind this veil lies a truth: her life is not a story of lack, but of sovereignty, a rare independence that cannot be reduced to stereotypes. Sovereignty begins when a woman is no longer defined by external structures. Throughout history, women have often been measured by their relationship to men: daughter, wife, mother, widow. Each label reduces the complexity of her existence to a function within someone else's life. To live alone, without that defining counterpart, is to step outside of these predetermined roles. In that space, she discovers herself not as an appendage but as a center in her own right. Her identity does not vanish into the shadow of another, it stands clear and unmediated. This is sovereignty, not in the sense of domination over others, but in the sense of self-rule, of being the sovereign of one's own life. Wholeness is born from this sovereignty. Many imagine that wholeness comes only from union, that a woman alone must be missing a vital half. But this idea belongs more to myth than to truth, and it is a myth often misread. The old story of two halves seeking completion in one another has been repeated so often that people forget its symbolic nature. True wholeness does not come from finding another to complete what is lacking, but from encountering the many fragments within and weaving them into unity. The woman who lives without a man has the chance to undertake this work in a way that is undistracted, unmediated. Without the constant reflection of a partner, she faces herself directly, and in that confrontation she begins the slow process of integration. She learns to embrace her light and her shadow, her strength and her vulnerability, her desire for union and her capacity for solitude. The result is a wholeness that does not depend on external completion, but arises from within. This truth is unsettling to society because it dismantles an old order. A woman who is sovereign, who is whole in herself, is difficult to control. She does not easily bend to expectations because her worth is not contingent on fulfilling them. She does not seek validation through the roles others assign to her because her value arises from a deeper source. To some, this is threatening. To others, it is liberating. But in either case, it challenges the collective projections that try to confine her. She becomes a mirror in which others see their own dependence on external structures, their own avoidance of solitude, their own unfinished search for wholeness. This is why she is so often misunderstood. Her very existence exposes truths that many would rather ignore. Yet this sovereignty is not cold detachment. The woman who has embraced her wholeness does not retreat into isolation as a fortress against life. On the contrary, she engages with the world more freely because she is not bound by the fear of incompleteness. She can love without clinging, give without losing herself, and create without the need for external applause. Her solitude does not mean she rejects intimacy. It means she approaches intimacy from a place of strength rather than need. This is why her presence can feel both mysterious and magnetic. Others sense that she carries something rare, something unshakable, a strength born not of resistance but of integration. Symbols and archetypes across cultures point to this truth. The queen who rules in her own right, the maiden who walks alone in the forest, the wise woman whose counsel is sought not because of her attachment to a man but because of her depth. These figures embody sovereignty. They reveal that the woman alone is not an anomaly, but an ancient archetype. She carries the power of independence, of insight, of wholeness that transcends societal definitions. Her solitude places her in continuity with these figures, reminding us that beyond the projections of culture, there exists a timeless image of the woman who belongs to herself. Living without a man does not mean the absence of love, nor does it mean the denial of desire. It means that love and desire are not the axis around which her life revolves. They may come and go, but they do not define her being. Her center remains intact, rooted in a deeper ground. This rooting is what makes her life appear so different to those who encounter her. They sense in her a kind of freedom, a self-possession that cannot be easily shaken. She is not desperate to be completed, nor afraid of being alone. This balance, this sovereignty, radiates as dignity, as presence, as wholeness. Wholeness is not perfection, and sovereignty is not the absence of vulnerability. A woman who lives alone still faces doubt, still feels the pangs of longing, still wrestles with the questions of existence. But she does so without hiding behind the roles that society offers as shields. She faces herself directly, and in that directness lies her strength. Her wholeness is not a flawless ideal, but a lived reality, a weaving together of contradictions into a tapestry that is uniquely hers. This authenticity is what sets her apart from the projections that surround her. In this light, the truth about women who live alone, without a man, is not a story of lack but of fullness, not of absence but of sovereignty. She is not a half waiting to be completed but a whole learning to unfold itself. She is not a social failure but a bearer of a deeper truth, one that unsettles conventions because it reveals an independence that cannot be reduced or controlled. To see her clearly is to strip away the projections and witness the rare reality of a soul that governs itself, a life that has discovered its own completeness. Through silence and self-encounter, a woman who lives alone gains depth, clarity, and freedom in relationships in ways that are often invisible to the casual eye, but unmistakable in presence. Silence becomes her companion, and in that companionship she learns to listen, not only to the outer world, but to the inner voices that most people flee from. In a life shared constantly with another, it is easy to lose oneself in the rhythms, conflicts, and expectations of the relationship, but in solitude there is no one to distract from the dialogue within. The quiet exposes what lies beneath, the longings unspoken, the fears avoided, the dreams forgotten. At first this can feel overwhelming, for silence strips away the noise that keeps the unconscious at bay. Yet, over time, she learns that silence is not emptiness but a teacher, and from it arises a clarity that could not have been found elsewhere. This clarity begins with self-encounter. To face oneself without escape is perhaps the most difficult of all tasks. Many people spend their lives in constant activity or relationships so as not to feel the weight of their own being. But a woman who lives alone cannot avoid this confrontation. In her solitude, she meets the shadows she carries, the unhealed wounds, the patterns inherited from the past. She also encounters her light, her creativity, her unique rhythm of life. To live with oneself in honesty is to undergo a slow and often painful transformation, for it means embracing what has long been disowned and reclaiming what has long been hidden. Yet out of this struggle emerges authenticity, and authenticity is the seed of true freedom. Depth grows naturally from this process. A woman who has endured the silence of her own soul and faced the truths it reveals develops an inner gravity. Her presence is not scattered by the winds of circumstance because she has learned to stand in her own center. Others sense this depth without always understanding it. It appears in the way she speaks, in the calmness of her demeanor, in the way she does not rush to fill every silence with words. She carries within her the weight of her own self-knowledge, and this weight anchors her interactions with the world. Where others may be superficial in their encounters, she brings depth, because she has lived with the depths of her own being. Clarity arises from this same well. Having faced herself, she sees more clearly into others. She recognizes the illusions people construct, the masks they wear, the defenses they build, because she has wrestled with her own. This does not make her judgmental but compassionate, for she knows how difficult it is to confront the truth of oneself. Her clarity is not a harsh light, but a gentle illumination that allows her to discern what lies beneath the surface. In relationships, this gives her a unique gift. She sees not only what people present, but also what they conceal, and she responds not merely to the mask, but to the deeper reality behind it. Freedom in relationships is perhaps the most profound fruit of her silence and self-encounter, because she has learned to live without dependency on another to define her. She enters relationships without the desperation to be completed. She does not cling to others out of fear of loneliness, for she has already lived through solitude and discovered its hidden richness. She does not demand that others save her from herself, for she has already faced herself. This freedom allows her to love more deeply, not less, because her love is not tainted by the fear of losing herself. She gives from abundance rather than from lack, and this abundance transforms the quality of her relationships. The paradox is that the woman who lives alone often becomes more capable of intimacy than those who are never without company. Having faced her own depths, she is not afraid of depth in others. Having endured her own silences, she is not afraid of silence between herself and another. Having found clarity within, she does not project illusions onto those she loves but sees them as they are. This makes her relationships more authentic, more real, because they are not built upon fantasy but upon truth. Freedom does not mean detachment. It means the ability to enter connection without being consumed by it. In myth and symbol, silence is often portrayed as the threshold to wisdom. The hermit retreats into solitude, the oracle listens in stillness before speaking, the mystic withdraws from the world to encounter the divine within. In each of these figures, silence is not absence but fullness, not repression but revelation. The woman who lives alone walks this same archetypal path. Through her silence she becomes attuned to the subtler dimensions of life, to the whispers of intuition, to the symbolic language of dreams. These inner resources enrich her relationships, for she brings to them not only her outer presence but also the depth of her inner world. Self-encounter also reshapes her boundaries. Having lived with herself, she knows what she can endure and what she cannot. She no longer allows herself to be consumed by the demands of others because she recognizes the value of her own inner space. This makes her relationships healthier, for she does not give from exhaustion but from strength. She has learned to say no when necessary, to withdraw when her soul requires solitude, and to engage when her heart is truly open. Such boundaries are not walls but expressions of clarity, and they protect the authenticity of her connections. Through silence and self-encounter, the woman alone also cultivates resilience. She has learned to face storms without the shelter of another, to endure nights without the comfort of a companion, to walk through challenges with only her own spirit as a guide. This resilience does not harden her but deepens her strength. It gives her confidence that she can endure and grow even without external support. In relationships, this resilience makes her less fearful, less prone to compromise her truth for the sake of security, less willing to accept illusions in exchange for comfort. She has discovered that she can stand alone, and this knowledge gives her freedom to stand with another without fear of losing herself. In the end, the silence and self-encounter of a woman who lives alone shape her into someone who carries both depth and lightness, clarity and compassion, freedom and capacity for love. She becomes a mirror in which others see their own avoidance of silence, their own fear of solitude, their own longing for authenticity. Her presence reminds them of what is possible when one dares to dwell with oneself, when one dares to listen to the voice within. And though the world may not always understand, it cannot help but recognize the rare strength that radiates from such a life. Her life embodies the universal truth that every soul must ultimately stand alone. For at the core of human existence lies the reality that no union, however deep, can erase the solitude of the inner journey. From birth to death, each individual carries within themselves an unrepeatable essence, a consciousness that no other can fully enter. Companionship may soothe, love may uplift, relationships may reflect, but the final responsibility of facing one's own being cannot be delegated. A woman who lives alone without a man brings this truth into visibility, not as an abstract philosophy but as a lived reality. Her life makes manifest what all must eventually confront, that each person walks a path that no other can walk for them. The universal truth of standing alone is often resisted, for it awakens fear. Most people long for togetherness as a way of escaping the weight of solitude. They imagine that by binding themselves to another, they can avoid the confrontation with their own inner depths. Yet no amount of closeness can dissolve the boundaries of the self. Even in the most intimate partnership, there remain spaces within the psyche that cannot be crossed, inner chambers that belong to the individual alone. When a woman embraces a life without constant companionship, she accepts what others often deny, that solitude is not an accident of circumstance, but a fundamental condition of existence. To embody this truth outwardly is both burden and gift. It is a burden because society resists the sight of it. A woman living alone unsettles conventional images of fulfillment, and her existence challenges the comfort of collective illusions. People ask why she has not chosen differently, as though solitude must always be the result of failure rather than the expression of truth. Yet it is also a gift, for she becomes a living reminder of the courage required to face life without illusions. By standing in her solitude, she shows others that the fear of aloneness can be transmuted into strength, that the silence of independence can be filled with meaning. Standing alone does not mean living in isolation from the world, but it does mean accepting the irreducible aloneness of the soul. The woman who lives alone without a man enters into this acceptance consciously. She learns to carry her life without leaning on external scaffolding for identity. She must answer her own questions, face her own shadows, discover her own light. This initiatory task is what many spend their lives postponing, yet she has allowed her life to press her into it. She demonstrates that the soul matures not by escaping solitude, but by embracing it, not by dissolving into another, but by standing firmly in itself. This truth is reflected in countless archetypes and symbols across human history. The solitary seeker, the sage in the wilderness, the mystic who withdraws to commune with the divine, all reveal the necessity of standing alone. In each of these figures, solitude is not emptiness but transformation, not abandonment but initiation. The woman who lives without a man embodies this same archetypal pattern in a modern form. She does not flee into distraction but remains with herself, and in doing so she walks a path that echoes with the wisdom of the ancients. Her life becomes an image of the soul's timeless task, to find its own ground, to live in its own truth, to stand whole within itself. The universality of this truth lies in its inevitability. No matter how deeply entwined two lives become, the moment of death must be faced alone. The silence of the inner journey cannot be shared. Dreams, wounds, inner struggles, all these belong to the solitary realm of the self. To ignore this reality is to live in illusion. To face it is to live in truth. A woman who accepts life alone embodies this reality long before the end. She carries in her daily existence the reminder that no other can complete the journey for her, that every soul is responsible for its own becoming. Yet in standing alone, paradoxically, she becomes more capable of connection. Because she does not rely on others to shield her from herself, she approaches them freely, without demand or dependency. She does not cling, for she has faced the silence and survived it. She does not fear being abandoned, for she has already lived in aloneness and discovered its strength. Her relationships are not attempts to escape the truth of solitude, but expressions of the wholeness she has found within it. This is why her presence often inspires others. She reflects back to them the possibility of living authentically, without denial of the solitary path that belongs to every human being. The courage of her life lies in the refusal to be defined by lack. The world may see her solitude as absence, but she knows it as presence. She recognizes that standing alone does not mean being empty, but being rooted in the deeper ground of the self. This rootedness allows her to walk through life with a kind of quiet dignity, a strength that does not demand recognition but radiates nonetheless. She becomes a reminder that the human task is not merely to merge with another, but to become whole in oneself, so that union, when it comes, is an enrichment rather than an escape. Every soul must stand alone, because each soul carries a unique destiny. No two journeys are alike, no two lives interchangeable. The woman who lives alone without a man accepts this truth consciously, and in doing so she honors the singularity of her existence. She lives not by comparison but by authenticity, not by conformity but by fidelity to her own path. This fidelity gives her life an integrity that cannot be imitated, for it arises from her direct encounter with the solitude of being. She embodies what many only discover at the end of life, that the soul's ultimate task is to walk its own way, even if that way leads into silence, into mystery, into the unknown. Her life therefore speaks not only to herself but to others. In her solitude, others glimpse the truth they would rather avoid, that no partner, no relationship, no external structure can carry the soul's deepest burden. Each must learn to bear it alone. Yet in seeing her strength, they also glimpse the possibility that solitude need not be despair, but can be the source of depth, clarity, and freedom. Her existence becomes both mirror and beacon, revealing the universal truth that to stand alone is not to be forsaken, but to be initiated into the deeper reality of the human spirit.